Recently, I had a conversation with a fellow calisthenics creator here on YouTube. His name's Lee Downing-Keat. And on that call, he brought up a really good question.
You were to start calisthenics first. I've always thought, like, if I could turn back time, everything I know now, if I go back into training, fresh new body, what would I do? If you were to think of, let's say, 5 tips you would give to a beginner who was getting into calisthenics, what would they be?
And I just thought that was so great because I've got now 8 years of training calisthenics under my belt. I started when I was 30. I'm now 38. And Lee has well over a decade under his belt too. So between the two of us, I think we can save you a lot of trouble. Now, one of my tips was don't neglect your cardio. And that's why I'm out here on this walk, all right? Now, back in the day, if you guys remember my beginner routine and some of the other routines I shared, gosh, it's been like 3 or 4 years now. Those routines were based on circuits, which combines strength training and aerobic training, right? You're doing your cardio as you do your resistance training. So I didn't necessarily neglect my cardio when I got started with calisthenics, but one thing I want to say is that I've learned over the years that it's definitely better to separate your resistance training and your cardio. But regardless of how you do it, make sure you don't skip cardio. All right, I got to turn around so you guys can see me. The sun is over here. So here's the deal. Cardio isn't just for calorie burn. A lot of people think you do cardio to burn calories. That's just a side benefit. The real benefit to doing cardio is that it strengthens this stuff in your lungs called cilia. They're little hair-like structures that pull in the oxygen from the air you breathe and infuse that oxygen into the blood in your heart. And then your heart pumps it throughout your body, right? So you're strengthening that ability to oxygenate your body, and that's going to improve blood circulation, improve your performance, and even improve your recovery. So don't neglect your cardio. Now, I still recommend doing circuits if you're tight on time, because you're combining strength and cardio into one session. But if you have the time, you can do straight sets, right? So your strength training is more focused. You're taking longer rests between sets, and you're giving your everything on each set, and then separate out your cardio. And go for a walk. You know, an hour-long walk, it's fantastic. You get to be out in nature, absorb the sun, get some vitamin D, and go see cool stuff. And speaking of that, there's this house nearby that's literally a castle. It's about a mile from here, and I love going there and just looking at that house. So let me take you there really quick. I want you to see this. Whew. All right, just coming up on the castle house. You guys got to check this out. It blows my mind. So I'm not sure if you can see that off in the distance. I'll get some better shots probably with my phone when I walk by their gate. But yeah, this house is like a castle. It's got towers. It's built out of stone. It's crazy. Some of the houses in here are over $1 million. I don't live in this neighborhood. I just walk here. But what I love about walking out in nature is I see all kinds of wildlife. You know, we have wild turkeys. I see them almost every time I walk. We've got hawks, coyotes, deer, and of course rabbits and squirrels and all that stuff. I see all kinds of wildlife, and that's just one of those things. Whenever I see it, it's just really awe-inspiring and like it makes me feel good. All right, guys, back at home base. That was a good walk, maybe 2.5 miles or so. Not bad for holding a camera. I got to pick up the yard. My kids, they make a lot of mess and leave a lot of mess, so I'm just going to clean that up. But tip number 2 is master the basics. And you've seen me cover the basics probably extensively here on the channel. What I consider the basics are push-ups and all the variations of them, all the basic variations, pull-ups, and that includes the lead-ups like body weight rows, dips, those are the squat of the upper body, don't neglect your dips, and of course lower body squats. Make sure you do your squats. Lunges, another really good leg exercise. Leg raises for the core. And a lot of people throw in back bridges as a beginner exercise or a basic exercise. I'm not sure if I consider that basic, but definitely the progressions, like the straight bridge, sure, why not? But another thing about the basics, you should always work on the basics. And that's because mastery isn't really a thing, at least in my opinion. Like, don't consider mastery a destination. It's not something you reach, it's a practice. So when I say mastering the basics, I mean, yes, you want to really be proficient with form on the basics before you move on to intermediate and advanced stuff. But keep in mind that mastery is an ongoing practice. You're never really going to master these exercises. You just always work at them in some capacity. All right, now let's go inside because I want to tell you more. All right, and tripods and lights are helpful. All right, now if I recall the conversation I had with Lee correctly, I believe my third tip was about mobility. I guess number 3 is don't neglect mobility. That's a big one that I did. I didn't do a lot of stretching in the beginning, and the basics will improve your flexibility and mobility to an extent, but you eventually want to start training that separately and not just rely on those basic movements. So the thing about mobility, like I said in that conversation, is that when you work on the basics, you're going to make improvements in your flexibility and mobility. It's just a byproduct of doing rep after rep after rep, week after week, month after month with the basics. But eventually you'll get to a point where you want to work on mobility and flexibility separately. And that's what my active rest days are for. I really recommend that approach. Whenever you have a rest day, that's when you do your cardio and you stretch or do yoga, do anything you need to do to improve your mobility. Now, 2 things you want to work on as a beginner right off the bat regarding mobility would be your hips and your shoulders, right? The 2 main joint complexes. And when I say hips, I'm talking about your pelvic alignment. And here's something you can practice right off the bat as a beginner that's going to help you with this, and it's called bracing. Okay, bracing the core is what some people call it. If you want to do this, here's what you want to try. Get in front of a mirror, like in your bathroom, and just let it all hang out like you have a beer belly. Just stick it out as far as you can. Then suck it in like you're putting on a tight pair of jeans, and flex your glutes like you're thrusting your hips forward. So it's all about the TVA, the transverse abdominis, and the glutes. And when you're contracting those, you will neutralize your pelvis. This not only really helps bring out your abs if you have low enough body fat, but it's essential for literally any calisthenics exercise you do. It's not necessarily essential for weightlifting and bodybuilding exercises because a lot of times your whole core and most of your body is supported on a bench, right? That's one of the disadvantages of lifting weights. But when you're doing calisthenics and you're constantly holding your entire body against gravity, that bracing is essential. So on push-ups, pull-ups, dips, squats, lunges, leg raises, anything you do, any of the basics and the advanced stuff, you always want to be bracing. So start working on that right away. I recommend doing bracing in a supine position, meaning laying on your back. The hollow body position is great for that. So you can practice that. Also in a prone position like straight arm planks or bent arm planks. And then also when you feel ready, start crawling up the wall and practicing bracing in an inverted position, right? Now that's getting into handstands, which I start to consider that intermediate. But hey, when you feel ready, you know your body better than anyone else. Now the hip complex is an enormous topic. I do have other videos. I think there's a whole stretch video for the hips. I will link that down below in the description box. But make sure you stay tuned to the channel because I'll be making more about mobility in the near future. And shoulders, it's the same thing, a huge topic. But let me share one quick tip for you. This is a very basic test you can do to see if you're ready for the upper body calisthenics. Put your back against the wall and brace the core like I just explained when I was talking about the hips. This will make your whole back flush against the wall. Your lower back and your mid back and your head should be against the wall. From here, you want to raise one arm up to the side so it's perpendicular to your torso. Then bend at the elbow. And what you're going to try to do is bring your forearm and hand up against the wall at a 90-degree angle. Try to do that multiple times and see if you feel any strain. Are you compensating? Are you arching your lower back? If you feel any strain or you're arching or any kind of compensation when you do this, it means you have tight internal rotators and you want to address that. You really want to start working on that before you go hog wild with the basic upper body exercises, because too much pushing specifically, if you have those tight internal rotators, can lead to rotator cuff pinching, all right? And you don't want that. Rotator cuff pain is bad. Make sure you do that on both sides as well, because you might have a muscular imbalance where one side is perfectly fine and the other is tight. So make sure you pay attention to that. If you want to learn more about the shoulders, I do have a video on that, and I'll put a link down below as well. So make sure you check out the description box. All right, now another tip I shared in that conversation was to pay attention to the SAID principle. And this is something a lot of beginners don't even know about or they forget about. The SAID principle means specific adaptation to imposed demands. In other words, the gains you get are what you train for. All right, it's that simple. So when you're mastering the basics or you're working on the basics and you're trying to get proficient with those, that's what you're going to get good at. And they will bring you closer to certain skills or exercises that you want to acquire in the future. But in order to actually attain those, you will need to train for them specifically. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but there's a lot of talk about crossover gains, and although that's true, that like if you train the tucked planche, it's going to help with your L-sit, absolutely, but they are two different exercises. So you really have to pay attention to the SAID principle. If you want to get good at something, you need to practice that specifically. All right, now for the fifth tip, back to holding the camera because I want to show you something. This tip is probably the most important. This is the Golden Nugget, so hopefully you watched the whole video, but be open-minded. I was closed-minded originally, and what I mean by that is I swore off weights. I would only lift my body, especially as a beginner, but even into intermediate training, and that's a mistake. So if you look here, I've got some dumbbells. Those are the Power Block dumbbells. They're expensive, I'm not gonna lie, they're $600, but a weight vest, which I also have, is much more affordable, and I don't recommend holding out too long before starting to add weight to your exercises. All right, I was for some reason just being really purist and saying I have to train only body weight, I can't add weight to my exercises, and I really don't recommend that. I think that held back my strength in some ways. But you know, being open-minded isn't just about lifting weights. I'm not saying you have to lift weights. I'm saying be open-minded about other modalities of training. You know, yoga is fantastic. It's body weight training. It's great for your mobility, your flexibility, your strength, and it's just good for your mind too, and it's almost spiritual. And primal movement is one that I dabbled in that was a lot of fun too. So look at other modalities of body weight training and see what you like, because trust me, when you plateau, that's your body saying, I need variety, I need something new. So when you branch out and try those new things, it actually helps your progress, and you don't even realize it till later. All right, now Lee also had some great tips, and Lee's tips were specifically about resistance training. He really honed in on doing the reps and doing the sets of resistance training. So I want to share his tips with you as well.
First one, similar to yours, which was go minimal but fundamental. So I'm more of a believer of minimalist style of training. I feel people, especially when they first start out as a beginner, they feel that they have to do lots and lots of different exercises, hit the body from lots of different angles to be able to get results. And I think from a minimal standpoint, I think you can get more gains. And from a minimal standpoint, you can always add if you need to. Mm-hmm. So an inverted row, push up, and maybe a squat or a lunge, I think is a fantastic place to start. Second one was training to failure. It's something I think people think they have to train to failure to get results, but I think there's more and more studies coming out now that you don't need to, and in some cases it can hold back your training, specifically for strength training. But I think overall hypertrophy, I think it can harm it as well, because volume's a driver for hypertrophy. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you go to an all-out set and you smash it really, really hard, let's say you can do 10 pull-ups, let's say, if you grind out that last rep, all of your sets afterwards, the volume really dramatically drops off. Third one is minimum effective dose, which is if you can grow doing 3 sets, why do 10? If you can grow doing 2 exercises per body part, why do 5? So instead of thinking I've got to go in there and annihilate the muscle, think what's the minimum amount of work that I can do to stimulate growth, and then stop, because then less time, it's less commitment, but it's easier on your recovery. And then you can always add volume if you need to. And then to progress in the future, as you become more intermediate, you've always got that room for more volume and more work to do. Fourth one was learning about your recovery. So as a beginner, your work capacity and your ability to recover is not very good. So when we think about what's the best program, what's the best exercises, should we do high reps, should we do low rep? All of our focus is on stimulus, but not a lot of it is on recovery. So we know that we should sleep 7 to 9 hours. We know we should get adequate protein and all these different things, but we also have to take into account our rest times and how much volume we're doing and how much time between each workout. And then the fifth one would be focus on mastering form over progressions. So progressive overload and focusing on increasing your reps or your sets or harder progressions is great, and you should be focusing on that, but focus more on mastering the exercise itself, because that will take you far further than jumping from 10 pull-ups to 15, because that gap, that increase that you've made, was it at the expense of something else? Could you have made better progress mastering the pull-up and thinking, okay, I can do 10, but can I make those 10 better? All right, so for those of you who are kind of new to calisthenics, or maybe you're getting back into it, hopefully you gleaned a lot from this video and learned a lot from all the tips me and Lee had to share. And hopefully you learned enough to want to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because I'll be making a lot more content for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.
Talk to you then.